Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss have a good thing going. Don't want to see it end. A lot of rumors out there, though, coming from the South. And we will discuss right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. This is Ole Miss Live right here at the Voice of College Football. And we don't have a show if we don't have Leanne Herring with us. So, Leanne, thanks so much for being here.
Always good to be here. Like I said, can't believe we're already a month into college football. And yeah, the Rebels, it doesn't always have to be the prettiest win. And that definitely wasn't smooth sailing in Salem for the Rebels. But yeah, looking ahead, week 4, it's going to be another challenge as they close out, non-conference heading into, conference play against Kentucky. So another challenging week, but another great week to be an Ole Miss Rebel, staying undefeated. But let's see if the train keeps rolling in Oxford this week.
Yeah, so Wake Forest doesn't want to see Ole Miss so much that they canceled next year's game.
Oh yeah, no, I know. When I saw that, I mean, I know that it was going to be. We knew that all going into that. We talked with Tony, who scheduled this game during homecoming. We know that some feelings were going to get very hurt. It was, like I said, it wasn't the prettiest and cleanest win by Ole Miss, but yet they did. I mean, not the biggest numbers, but still substantially. But yeah, they definitely let a bad taste in Wake's side to be able to want to do that buyout, and then it didn't take too long for Wake to find an appointment, and another opponent because they've already announced that one, and of course we heard. That's what you got to love about Lane Kiffin is his vocalness at Ole Miss, and as real as they come, because it's really true. A lot of people don't think how difficult the scheduling is. To be able to schedule big games, especially when you're Ole Miss, especially when you're Wake. So Lane was quick to jump, and rightfully so. To share his opinion about basically why it's an underride rule that you really don't do those kind of things, but. Like I said, we must have left Jackson Dart, even with those faults, even with those penalties, they left a pretty bad taste in Wake Forest now. So we won't be seeing them anytime soon.
Yeah, I looked at that earlier this week when that came down, and I don't exactly recall the reasoning behind it, apparently, from a Wake Forest standpoint, because they're going to have to travel all the way across the country. And I know that they scheduled the home and home series with Oregon State, so it covers another non-conference hole that they had to fill, but still not to follow through on an obligation that's coming up next year. It's not like they're giving Ole Miss 5 or 6 years to figure out who to schedule in that spot. Doesn't seem like the best.
Yeah, exactly. I was kind of taking back when I heard the news. Like you said, there really wasn't a reason other than, like I said, it was kind of like the kid it's like a kid losing a fight, having a little. There just really wasn't. I didn't hear it, and obviously, there really just wasn't a reason. I think that's what kind of threw everybody with the left curveball. I think it was more just kind of, I didn't want to say bad sportsmanship, but in the same way, there wasn't really, I didn't see anything justifying other than, the scoreboard and how we played and the way we left him on homecoming, just, kind of packing up the bus and not really sending them home because they're at home. But like I said, I didn't really see a reason or justification enough to do it. Like you said, this isn't, hey, we're thinking about not playing this matchup. Let's see, like you said, to find another opponent in less than a year, because we're looking at less than a year. This is not, a scheduled game 2-3 years down the road. So yeah, it kind of left everybody perplexed. And I think that's a big reason why Lane voiced his opinion of, why it's an underwritten rule that you just really don't do those things, regardless whether you win or you lose. Those are things that, like you said, don't fulfill an obligation. Really not cool when it comes down to it, because there's just so much involved trying to schedule games like that. And then now Ole Miss has to go out and find a reasonable opponent that they can play to replace that, which I don't think will be any problem. But again, it comes down to logistics that, those are things you don't want to have to worry about ahead of time. You're trying to focus on playing ball, not trying to plan future games.
Yeah, the Wake Forest athletic director, to me, did not make a good selling point here. Just a lot of fluff language, HR type speak about being committed to making the best decisions to serve our program and student athletes. Includes bringing national games to Winston-Salem, which of course
I would have to say an SEC. Yeah, exactly. I would have to see an SEC game in week 3. Yeah, no, exactly. So I agree with you right there. I just don't think the athletic director gave plausible cause as to a realistic thing. That's why we're really terminating this partnership. But maybe it'll open doors in even a bigger matchup that we're going to get more excited about for the Rebels. They say when one door closes, another one opens. So I think that this could be a very well good case for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin down the road. I don't think there's going to be any problem getting an opponent.
definitely doesn't sell me since Wake Forest has to travel all the way across the country to Oregon rather than just going to Mississippi.
Exactly. It's a yeah. Even though it's a definitely shorter flight, to hang into Memphis, to drive about less than an hour up the road. Like I said, and then having to readjust to the time zone. I know that we talked about that stuff, but I mean, when you're playing all the way on the East Coast and then making the long trip, having you haul in all your team over there, there's still about an adjustment. So yeah, it just logistically it just doesn't seem plausible. But hey, that's like I said, that was an interesting reasoning call that I think everyone's just kind of perplexed by. But shake it off, move on, looking ahead.
Absolutely. From the Ole Miss side, yes, they're losing nothing here. They'll be fine. Schedule somebody else, move on. But again, just from the Wake Forest side to hide behind the we're doing what's best for the student athlete while traveling them all the way across the country to Oregon is not necessarily what's
It's
best for
not.
the student athlete.
I'm right there with you. Yeah, using that. Yep. No doubt.
Appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football. So Leanne and I get together each and every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We will have a scheduled switch coming up here in a couple weeks. But for right now, just think Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So do the same thing next week. Bring a friend or two or three or 50 with you to watch some Ole Miss talk. And so the game itself was pretty much what I expected. I went back on Monday or Tuesday and looked at it and went through the highlights. So it just played the game itself because I didn't watch it on Saturday. And Ole Miss was just overwhelming in the passing game again. Jackson Dart rang up ridiculous numbers. The one-on-one matchups were going Ole Miss's way all day. The defensive line, as you have touted, was overwhelming on that side of the ball, just making life hell on Hank Bachmeier, trying to be able to find receivers downfield. So it was just, it was a win that Ole Miss clearly showed just in the first quarter to be the dominant team, and then just didn't even step on the gas and still won by 34 points.
No, you absolutely. I think the resilience that we saw on both sides of the ball, regardless of Wake Forest and what kind of thing, you got to understand. I think Tony hit on it a little bit, and we kind of talked about the things that makes team. It was a difficult game. It was an easy win, but it wasn't because a lot of the things that we saw as far as what we need to work on. There was a lot of good, obviously, like all the four that you've mentioned right now. But the things I would like to see heading into this next game were the penalties. I mean, even playing against that Wake Forest team, we had 110-yard worth of penalties. That absolutely cannot continue to happen especially going into Georgia Southern, and definitely not into conference play. I mean, every game we're going to get penalties, but that's one of the things that I saw. We had a lot of missteps, and I think it's just too easing in. When you play a team like Wake Forest, even though they didn't put a lot of points on the board, that kind of offense, that kind of scheme that they put is not something that the Rebels are used to. They're not. That's like I said, that's like playing teams like Air Force and Navy. It's not something you see every day, which makes it really hard to prepare. And I think it really makes it more difficult on our defensive line, our linebackers, our corners, because when you play a lot, like I said, we've been playing a lot of zone. A lot of man-to-man coverage. So when you're asking, our corners, our DBs to have to guard those wide receivers, it can be kind of exhausting what we see. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the adjustment that we make. Obviously, I think what I would like to see heading into this game that I saw was the biggest thing, aside that we have to work on, because like I said, we did a lot of things great. We're translating like we do on paper. Everything that we talked about this preseason, everything that we talked about in week 1 and week 2, as far as what we're doing great on paper is translating really well, especially in the offense. And we're winning that battle on both sides of that line of scrimmage on offense and defense, which has been something, like I said, a battle that we've had an uphill climb for the Ole Miss Rebels for a long time. And I think that we're going to see that continue to elevate. But of course, like in any coach, when you're watching film, what are the things we have to work on? And the biggest thing, like I said, it wasn't the prettiest, cleanest win, and it doesn't have to be, because at the end of the day, we're still undefeated. It puts a W on the board. But what we can't continue to do is those penalties. And what I really want to see is us. There was, of course, that faulty snap. We saw Jackson Dart throw a pick. Those are things that are going to happen in games. We can't expect this perfection across the board, as good as any team is, as good as this team is. That's going to happen. Missteps are going to make. But I think another thing that I really want to see as far as cleaning up penalties is really winning, making sure that we continue to win on those turnover battles. I think those are going to be key in this game. I think there's a lot of familiarities going into this game. But I mean, and we'll talk about it a little later, but I think those are the two key points. Like I said, offense is playing really well. I think we'll continue to dominate on the ball. Control the game has been key. We're running RPO, so I think as far as being able to answer the call, even though Wake Forest was bringing a different type of schematic playbook to us, we are able with the RPO that we run, being able to answer those calls. We're going to put points on the board. It's just a matter of how many and how we are going to do and how effective we're going to be. And we've been really good at doing that. But I think another key battle is controlling that game. But that what we're doing in the trenches has been really instrumental. I mean, talk about definitely on the defensive side of the ball. You cannot not talk. I mentioned Will Eccles a lot, but of course, let's talk about Walter Nolan. I mean, he was one of the most touted kids coming out of high school. And then when he went to A&M, making that transfer, he was worth everything that was invested in him before coming to Ole Miss, because you can't help but not talk about that defensive line without mentioning his name. But I think a big thing for us that we'll continue to do, and it's going to help us as we get into play, is winning that line of scrimmage. But like I said, it's going to be a lot of cleanup, I think, this week. Georgia Southern will not be as an easy task, I believe, because there's a lot of familiarities between both coaches. And what we're going to see, Georgia Southern, I think that they're going to bring a lot more to the table than what Wake Forest brought. And a lot more familiarity, I think, that a lot of our defensive guys, especially our secondary, that I'll hit on a little bit later. But I think really that from week 3 to week 4, a lot of strong points. But it's those little details it's cleaning up heading into week 4.
Our guy Jackson is dropping a lot of good info there in the chat, everyone. So right here, we've got Leanne's Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it these days, her account. So if you want to follow Leanne on Twitter, then you can do that. Just grab the link. It's right there in the chat. And so just to give you a little background on what we're doing here, folks, of course, this is our Ole Miss show that we just launched last week. So we just, in unison with the show itself, we launched a Ole Miss channel. So there we go. So we are not able to stream on the Ole Miss channel right this second because you've got to populate the channel with a little content. So thus we've got some simulated games that we've got there. So we've posted a few videos so we can broadcast on the Ole Miss channel here very soon. So you're stuck on the main channel with me, Leanne, sorry, but we'll get us all over on the Ole Miss channel there very soon. And you can catch us on the SEC channel as well. So Ole Miss content is coming soon, everyone, but specifically this show every week. All right. Nobody got hurt against Wake, right? Is everybody okay? Are there any injuries that stand out?
I think the biggest thing, and I think it's not a bad thing for Ole Miss. You never want to lose a player, but of course, Jared Ivey, another strong player, he's a little bit banged up. And I think, but the transition of being able to have a young kid step up like Centarian Perkins, I was going to mention it a little later, but we're already talking about him. I think he's another kid that's going to have an extremely amazing game. And I think, this is going back to speaking about the depth that has been accumulated this season that we haven't had a long time. Before, when we had our quarterbacks gone down, because, that's been notorious with us happening. When we have a lot of our key players, our starters go down, it's been somewhat panic mode. How do you adapt and adjust? Ole Miss hasn't been able to have that cushion like we do this year. And I think that, when you see that Jared Ivey's banged up, we have some other players, that are still trying to heal and whatnot, or are not right, haven't got as much playing time as others. Now that we have this immense depth that we can, I think it puts the coaching staff at ease. It puts the players at ease. So I think that, even though we have some kids banged up and everything, we have a lot of plug and play, a lot of young guys, especially, like I said, Centarian Perkins, I believe, is going to have a really big game taking in for Jared Ivey. Of course, like I said, we don't want to see someone like Jared Ivey out. But again, the fact that we are able to reload so quickly and not have this hesitation, who are we going to put in that's going to be able to give that effort that Jerry Ivey is and have that same confidence? But now, not just that position, but so many positions, so I think having that, like I said, that front line being so dominant and then having immense depth is just going to help us week in and week out.
Leanne, I'm proud of myself for two reasons today. Number one, I selected a banner color and I didn't even think about it, but I just kind of there's a spectrum on the StreamYard that you just kind of like look at the color spectrum,
Yeah.
and I just kind of clicked it and boom, and it looks like I matched your hat perfectly.
Yep, always wearing my powder blues. University traditions. They're really good to me. They always bring me the best hats and everything. It says Mississippi across. So yeah, I'm always most of the times you're gonna see me, I'm gonna be in a hat. It's like a comfort thing. Yeah. And I felt like today was a backward I call it my backwards action kind of day, always before game day. When I'm really into a game or on the sidelines, when I turn my hat backwards, that's just, we're trying to get down to business, trying to get in the zone. Like I said, I went from being a college cheerleader at Brown to being an equipment manager. A shout out to all our equipment managers, not just at Ole Miss, because it is Equipment Manager Appreciation Week, if you didn't know. So a lot of people it takes to prepare. We have Ken Crane, obviously, at Ole Miss, is a legend. And so many people out there that help our players get healthy and keep them stay healthy and get all their equipment and everything ready. So shout out to all our equipment managers for Equipment Appreciation Week, high school level, college level, can't get it done without the people behind the scenes.
See, when I was playing high school baseball, my coach would mention to me every once in a while. Well, he probably only mentioned this to me really once because he was like, "What are you doing out there with your hat?" And because I'm like playing with my hat while I'm standing out in the outfield because it never
Yeah.
felt like comfortable, and I had a lot more
Yeah.
hair then than I do now. But yeah, so I was messing around with my baseball hat. So the other thing that came to mind that just kind of fit was I usually clear the shelf. Okay, it's Ole Miss show. Boom, we put up the Rebels there by themselves,
Yes.
and it just so happened. This must be karma, synergy, whatever you want to call it. But the Florida helmet was already sitting there, and then I was about to take it off. Then I went, I guess
Oh
I'll just
yeah, you
leave it
can't take
there.
it off just quite yet. I mean, we can't. I know that this is a conversation that's already been had, and we talked a little bit about for it before air. But I mean, I just don't think you cannot not bring it up. Talking about Lane Kiffin and the Florida Gators, and it's a swampy mess out there in Gainesville, and where do we begin? Where do we start? So I'll let you take the lead on this one, and then we'll jump right in what your thoughts are. I mean, I have my own thoughts on it. I think everyone's kind of expressed their opinion, whether you're a Florida Gator or you're Ole Miss Rebel, where things stand. But
Yeah, I'll start here. That when we look at the Florida football program historically, it gets a ton of credit and rightfully so. But if you really boil down the success of this program, it's not been at the level of fill in the blank, Alabama, LSU, etc. Uh, there have basically been two coaches, Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, that have reached the elite status at Florida. Otherwise, it's not been an overwhelming success at Florida throughout their football history. And certainly they're on a run of four consecutive coaches now that have not met expectations. Dan Mullen, you could make certain concessions to because he had a nice 3-year run there until things went south and he just kind of went off the rails off the field as well with a lot of strange things that he pulled. So that
oh yeah,
showed him the door.
I'm right there with you. I think like a lot of storied programs that, when you think of Florida teams, you think of Miami. Miami hasn't quite made that resilience back of the Miami that most people think about. Same thing with I think with Florida. I think the biggest thing as our program grows at Ole Miss, as Lane Kiffin as a head coach continues to have more success, as his coaches and his assistants continue to have more success, his players also have success. That's just going to make you have a bigger target on your back when a program opens up, especially a program as big as Florida. In the eyes of most people, they're going to go to Lane Kiffin. Why wouldn't you? Look at what he's doing at Ole Miss. Look at what he's done at Ole Miss. What kind of turnaround? Look at the kind of players he develops. Look at the kind of staff he puts together. Now, my problem is with that. You can take Lane Kiffin and you can give him all the resources in Florida Gator program. You can do all those, but that program isn't going to be overturned overnight. When you look at what he's done at Ole Miss, this is his 5th year. It's taken time and resources to be able to mold this program with what it is. And I think that's the biggest misconception, that when you go to a program like Florida, yes, I've heard the thing, we've won more, we've been in a better position historically to win conference championships, to make a natty run. We have more financial resources. And that all looks good on paper, but it doesn't translate, like you said, in the current state that Florida's in. think about it. I mean, they're still paying off Mullins. They're going to still potentially have to pay off another coach, have a buyout financially. So, and I think too, I obviously can't speak for Lane Kiffin, but just being in the around and hearing what goes on and those kind of things, you can't help but think that Ole Miss is the better job, not just because of a bias here that I'm trying to say, but Ole Miss right now allows Lane to be a head football coach, allows his staff to be involved, but is not overbearing. Where I feel like that's a lot of, I've talked with a lot of assistants and a lot of coaches at other SEC programs, at other power programs, that right now there's a lot of, believe it or not, there's a lot of tug and pull, somewhat of a tug of war between, coaching staffs and boosters and collectives right now. Because, at a program like Florida, let's not be real, like a program like Texas A&M was a perfect example. When people want to invest that much in a program, they also feel the need to have a big say-so. And we all know that sometimes boosters have too much of a say-so and they want to control the narrative of the game. And I think that's where we see a lot of teams not have success. Whereas I feel like that's not an appealing thing about Florida. We know that the boosters are going to want to be very involved. They're going to want to they have no problem writing the checks and putting the resources, but they also want to have a more control in the program. And I don't think that that's a big upside for Lane Kiffin to leave. Right now at Ole Miss, he's running his ball club. He's in control of what his program is doing and of his players. He's working well with the NIL and the collective, how that's working. And and to be quite honest, he's bearing roots here. I mean, he just hired his brother back on his staff. He's got his children there. And I think this is just a more mature Lane Kiffin than we saw a lot of years ago. So, the Florida job looks good on paper because it provides a lot of resources, historically and all these kind of things. But my biggest thing is if the Gators Nation in Florida thinks that by hiring Lane and cutting him a big check, that he's going to be able to turn that program overnight, I'm sorry. You can put Jesus Christ in that program right now, and all the money in the world isn't going to change that, because it's over time. It's a gradual process, because Lane would basically have to go out there, gut that program, hire a new staff, find and recruit new players, see what's going to work, see what's not going to work. And that's a big task. We're already almost at the end of September, So it's just realistically at imaginative. I mean, the Florida job looks great on paper. I know that if I'm Jimmy Sexton right now, I'm playing, a little bit of devil's advocate here, trying to up the ante over here with a deal saying, hey, we might be interested in that job. But honestly, I think that Lane's come a long way in so many aspects, and he's built roots here. And I don't think he wants to let go of what he's built in Ole Miss, especially in the midseason. I think that just with the Florida job, it's going to be so demanding, but it comes a lot of stipulations that I think as a head ball coach, you really don't want to partake in, because it allows you to have to give up a lot of control of your program. And we've seen it historically. Like I said, Texas A&M, when they hired Jimbo Fisher, all that immense amount of money, that recruiting class, that roster was just a perfect example, what money couldn't buy. Dallas Cowboys, another perfect example of, all the money invested in those teams. They have such potential, but the operations, the coaching staff is not able to, I believe, control their program to be able to reach its successes. And I would say that Florida's a similar way. I just don't think that there's enough control as far as enough enticement, enough control where you want your program to be, without certain aspects being involved that don't let you win, that stop you, impede you from winning championships and things that Florida wants. I just think that the vision that Lane is going to and building here at Ole Miss is very different than what Florida is demanding on such a short time, even for any amount of dollar.
Yeah, just to finish my take, historically, I think if you ask the average college football fan, they would put Florida at a higher coaching level than Ole Miss, but I think that that's outdated thinking. I don't see it in the current programs. Now, I don't know what the resource difference is, but if you look at the television contract, obviously both being in the SEC, they get the same cut from Disney and ESPN, ABC from the television package, just like everybody else does in the SEC, which is going to go up considerably here in the next year because the new contract kicks in. And then on top of that, I look at Lane Kiffin's situation with Ole Miss, and if they achieve their goals, get into the college football playoff, make a decent run, I think that's going to kind of show him that he's able to accomplish everything at Ole Miss that he could accomplish at Florida. But like you say, with a 5-year head start at Ole Miss, and you get attached to people, you get attached to a way of life, you get attached, and your family does as well. And then you also get attached to the players that you recruited and signed. You get attached to just, okay, we built something here and I love what we built. I want to see it all the way through rather than starting over again. And I think he's gotten to a place in his career where he's had to start over before. He's moved on because he was a young guy. He was aggressive in his career pursuits, but it was also a combination of him moving on, but also, like any other coach, being shown the door. And I just don't see where Florida at this point is a better job than Ole Miss. And just the logistics of the season, if they go deep into the playoffs, Florida's going to miss a national signing day with their new coach. If they're waiting for somebody that's in the playoffs, they're going to miss a ton of time in starting to get ramped up for 2025.
Exactly, and especially on the recruiting trail. I mean, you're going to have to rebuild your whole team. Like you said, it's not the easiest move. You can have all, and I think, like I said, again, that's a misconception. You can have a lot of financial resources to grow collectives at Florida, to go out there and get the money to recruit the players, vice versa. But like you said, it takes time and money and so many things, and you have to convince these guys. I think that there's also a misconception. Okay, if we get Lane as a head coach, who is he going to bring with us? Is that, is he going to, he obviously, because we know when coaches transition, they have their staff that they bring with them. They have the coaches that they work with, analysts that they work with, and they also have players, like you said, because they built those relationships. But I honestly think that that's a big misconception Florida has by throwing resources, by upping the ante of what Ole Miss can offer right now as far as financials and things like that. I think that that's what they're seeing foremost. But again, that takes time. That takes so much more than just a couple of months. Because like you said, you don't want to be in transition. I know working with recruits, a lot of the times when they see that a coach, not even just a head coach, when an OC or a DC changes, or their recruiter coach that has built a relationship is on the fence of leaving, or they move somewhere else. A lot of those kids don't like being left in limbo, and that's the last thing Florida wants to do, is being stuck, similar to what happened with Texas A&M when they had that mass exodus of kids in the transfer portal, a mass exodus of recruits, losing top-notch recruits, because then they're really going to have to start from the bottom up. And like you said, it's already the end of September. You don't want to go into a new signing period, especially with it being in December, especially with these young guys don't like that. They don't like that what if. They want to know who they're going to play for, what they're going to do. And it takes time, because a lot of these kids, they value the relationships. It's not necessarily about the NIL money. It plays a factor, but believe it or not, a lot of these kids, they want strong relationships. They want to know who they're playing for, what the mission is, how are they going to be used on that. And then when you hire a new coaching staff, when you're having to transition, it's a really difficult thing when you're looking at it from a recruiting point. So, it sounds good in the utopia. It sounds good in the idea of hiring Lane Kiffin, but you can't take a coach or a kid or a program that has one success and expect that to happen in a completely different program. No matter how, like I said, no matter how good or elite the coach is, it takes a lot of time and transition that the Florida Gators just haven't given themselves, enough. Like I said, had this happened preseason, had this, been a talk about last season, a conversation, that's a little bit more time to prepare. But like you said, I just don't see Lane Kiffin walking out on what he has and what he's built here, go take a job at Florida right now, which is a major rebuild.
If Lane Kiffin is still the head coach at Ole Miss on December 31st, he gets a contract bonus that kicks in that will put him right around $9 million per year. The bonuses, I saw 150,000. I saw 250,000. I think the 250 was last year. The 150s this year. Regardless, it totals out to 9 million, and that puts him in the top 5 to 8, somewhere in that range in college football. I've lost track of the top head coaches past Kirby, making 13. And then,
yeah, exactly.
All the likely guys are up there: Brian Kelly, Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley. But Lane Kiffin is not far behind. So it's not like they're paying him $3 or $4 million a year and he's at Vanderbilt. This would not be
exactly.
Sure, they could break the bank and say, here's $12 million a year and 9 million, 12 million. Maybe Ole Miss comes back and says, hey, we'll throw you a little bit more incentives. His contract runs through 2029. So that would have to be dealt with as well. I just don't see him leaving myself. I don't know the guy like you. I don't know him. I don't know what drives him. I know what drives all these coaches is success and they want to achieve. And there is a certain lure of, I want to go somewhere that's got a big tradition and I want to fix it and bring them back. But I do think that he's doing that already at Ole Miss. He's already brought the program back most of the way and he wants to finish the mission. That's what I'm guessing.
Exactly. And I think, like I said, he has control of his program. And I don't mean control in a bad way, but as like I said, as a head coach, you want to be able to win games. You want to be able to have, you know, things align. And I think that right now the relationship and support between the university, the collective, and the boosters, they support Lane in what he does. They support his coaching. It's not like, Friday night or that Saturday night when you're at games and you hear those parents, trying to coach ball. And we all know that half of them have never played a down of football. But I think that the boosters see what they're doing, what a great job he's doing, and what his staff is doing, and they allow him to do that. And I feel like a place like Florida, places like Texas A&M. I mean, going back to when the Texas job was open, and I think that's a big reason why Nick Saban didn't take that job, because I feel like there has to be a certain coach to coach at Texas. Obviously, we all know that Nick Saban was more than capable, but also Nick Saban likes control of his team. You want him to win football games. You want him to do stuff at Alabama. He wants to be in the driving seat. He doesn't want you to tell him how to do his job when you're not on his staff, when you're not one of his players. I think that's the same thing with Lane Kiffin and those things. He's got a good thing going on here. Like you said, when you break about the financials, when you break about the roots, there's just nothing really enticing about Florida. Again, this is something that they want done overnight, and realistically that's just not something that's going to happen. And I mean, we saw historically, we talked about Florida being a job. Everyone knew when Will Muschamp was assistant to Mac at Texas, he was the coach in waiting. I mean, why do you not stay there and wait for the Texas job? And look what happened when he decided, oh wow, Florida Gators, let's go, head coach. It seemed really good. It seemed really good. It seemed really enticing. And then it didn't work out for Muschamp. Imagine if he would have stayed as a Texas head, coach in waiting. Where would have Texas been? Would have it taken them so long to be back? So that's just another historical situation where it looked really enticing. It looked really great from afar. It looked really good on paper, but again, it doesn't pan out because the success that you want to achieve, like what Ole Miss has done, it's taken at least 5 years. I mean, when Lane inherited this program, we all know it wasn't the easiest program to inherit, coming off, violations, coming off resource and all that. So it takes time to build a program, and not everybody can be Alabama and those other programs that you want to be overnight. It takes, and I think that's the biggest thing at Florida. They want to a quick fix, a band-aid that is not going to help them get to the ultimate goal of winning championships and getting back to that level that they once knew of glory.
Yeah, something that you hit on to a certain extent in looking at the Texas situation in the past and looking at Florida is, if I'm Lane Kiffin, sure, I know that you're in the SEC just like I'm in the SEC right now. So you're where I want to be in terms of a conference and where it's at in college football and the money works and all that. Who knows what he thinks about the part of the country, those sorts of things that he knows. But I would want to know and would work a lot of back channels to figure out what's going on at Florida. Like, can I trust this administration? Can I trust the people I'm working with? Sure, I'm going to get money thrown at situations, but are things going to be handled the right way? You alluded to Texas being a situation that for years a head coach would go into that thinking, okay, more than any other job in the country, I'm going to have to deal with boosters and politicians in the state
Yeah.
breathing down my neck, telling me what to do, kind of nudging me in a certain way to run the program this way or that way. And I'm not saying that it happens at Florida to that extent, but I get the feeling that it does to a certain extent.
Oh yeah, right there with you. And I think that's the biggest thing, that you want your boosters to be involved. You want there to be this collaborative effort, especially from where you're getting resources. Because like I said, again, at the end of the day, it's a business. Um, boosters back then were run a little different, and now it's a little bit more open playing field. And boosters and donors and all that, they make even a more impact with the way NIL and things are shaping. and so many. But at the end of the day, it's really interesting that how there's a lot of programs where boosters, want to run the show. They want to call the show from behind the scenes because that prowess that if I write a check, then I have an entitlement and so forth. You can explain it however you like. But at the end of the day, it's really interesting. These same boosters that want to win championships, they want to achieve these trophies, these accolades. They don't allow their head coaches, they don't allow these coaching staffs to do what they do best. Why invest and hire in a winning coach like Lane Kiffin if you're not going to allow Lane Kiffin to run his ball club? If you're not going to allow there, because any of these boosters, we all know that some of them played football and all that, and they played in college, they have experience. But at the end of the day, different programs, different things, who I don't know where they think that, allowing to give their 2 cents in and not allowing a coach that you invest so much money in and have that much faith in them to run a program. There's always this need to, like I said, to put your 2 cents in. And I think a lot of coaches, have to go with it and they have to endure it because again, it's boosters, it's part of the job and the gig. But at the end of the day, you don't, as a head coach, especially in the SEC, you want to focus on your playbook, your players, your coaches, and developing. That's where it comes down to, is you don't have time to be worrying about, what this person thinks how you should run a ball club because they wrote a check. That's a really big misconception. Yet some of the times in these situations, those are the guys that hold all the cards when you make a mistake or you don't do something wrong. Let's get this guy out. We don't want him anymore. So it's a very extreme when it comes to it coaching these days, because the minute they'll love you when you're winning and you're doing well, but then it can easily turn when you're not doing so hot. But Napier's had plenty of opportunities. There's a lot of coaches right now that have had plenty of opportunity to turn things around. So like you said, and you hit on that, there's a lot more problems at Florida other than Napier. You want to put it all on the coach, but like you said, the administration, there's a lot of things that just aren't clicking. You have a lot of capabilities, but there's no cohesion, there's no identity. And then, it just slowly starts to fall apart. But Napier, of course, is going to take the fall for it because he's the head coach.
So, Leanne, I know that you've been known to throw down a point spread or two here and there. So I want you to listen to this along with everybody else. So we're going to give you about a minute off and let everyone know about a new feature that we've got here, the Voice of College Football. College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now. So we got Ole Miss as a 35.5 point favorite against Georgia Southern. How are your picks going this year, Leanne?
They've been going all right. This week, I have a few, looking at a few picks. I feel like week 4, it's kind of, like I said, rounding out those non-conference games. There wasn't a lot of games this week that I was really liking, but I'm really liking that, Georgia Tech going on the road to play Louisville. I like Georgia Tech at 10. I think Georgia Tech's always one of those gritty teams, very similar to Georgia Southern. Louisville has been on a great run. I noticed, on the promo, he was, his under the radar was that Louisville, they're one of those teams that Jeff Brom has just really gone out there, another program that's really turned things around, playing really good ball, went out there, recruited a lot of strong players, a lot of kids out of the transfer portal. So, I think they should come out with a win, but I really like Georgia Tech for those 10 points. And then, since we're talking about Florida and we're talking about the state of Mississippi, that other team down in Starkville, they host Florida. That should be an interesting game. It's basically, I call it the dumpster fire game. Two really teams that are just trying to get a win under their belt. You know, two SEC teams that are just trying to get a win under the belt. I know that I really like the over and under in that. I think that it's like a 58.5. So I like the under. I think it's going to be a close, low scoring game. I think it's just going to be a battle. Is it going to be a gator or is it going to be a dog that's going to come out in this fight?
Good stuff. That it's funny that you mentioned Louisville because that just was coincidence because that was a shot from last year when we put the.
No,
So
I was
that
going to
was
say,
that was
yeah,
it. That
no,
was another
yeah, no,
game.
I know you said, yeah, because I was like, that was what I was going to say. Those were some of the lower spreads, but yeah, Louisville's having a nice run. Well, man, the ACC talk about, I know, you know, down the road we talked about, you know, talking about other conferences around the SEC and everything, but man, the ACC is just, wouldn't you love to be in the ACC right now? Just because it just seems so wide open because all the, you know, all the typical powerhouses, it really is anybody's game. I mean, you know, Miami could make a run. They, you know, they play South Florida this week, but I mean, teams like Louisville, I mean, just like historically, like you said, it's just the game has changed so much down the road, you know, and it's just, if you want to be in the ACC right now, because I know being in the SEC is going to be a tough conference, especially now we're all one and no division.
All right. You can catch Leanne on Twitter. We'll have her Twitter handle posted here, and you can follow all of her work right there. Is there anything in particular that people should know about this week that you're working on?
I think the biggest thing this week, as far as you know, we cannot talk about Ole Miss, and we cannot talk about the recruiting trail, which you know is my bread and butter. We always have everything Ole Miss over at the Rebel Walk. We have a great staff breakdown analysis, but as far as recruiting or the recruiting trail, as I like to say, I think the biggest watch for Ole Miss fans that they've been waiting on. It's kind of taken a little bit of turn. I mentioned him last week on the show. Of course, you know, 4-star safety, Ladarian Clardy, class of 2025. Has pushed back his commitment date. He's been rocking Ole Miss gloves. You know, there's been this whole thing for even, you know, he took a couple visits to Washington, didn't make it to Juice Fest, but, you know, it seemed all calm, all the waters. And here comes again, late in the game, LSU. Just a few days ago, like I said, Ladarian is scheduled to commit for the second time on Saturday, ironically, as we play Georgia Southern. But a couple of days ago, one of his dream schools, the LSU Tigers, those Bayou Bengals, have come in and put in an offer. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Will Ladarian, you know, he still pretty much has kind of said there on social, kind of just talking with them, you know, still set to commit in just a couple of days on Saturday. But you can't help but think, will the commitment be pushed back? Since, like I said, another strange turn of events, LSU comes in, and it makes me wonder. It just shows how much recruiting, and we're talking about this before the show starts, how much recruiting's just changed because, you know, back a couple of years ago, as a high talented recruit as Clardy is, you really, and before, of course, NIL, you really wouldn't, you pretty much knew who your guys were, who you were building relationships, who you've been talking with. So even if the big dog came in, you know, it was much of the mentality like, why are you waiting this long? I've been just as good a couple years ago. Why all of a sudden, when I'm about to commit, most likely, like I said, to Ole Miss, why all of a sudden do you want me now? Like, what makes me so enticing? Is it because y'all are in the hot seat, or because Ole Miss is that good? You know, so it's just really interesting to see how, you know, recruiting's changed so much. So I know that all the Rebels have been eagerly awaiting his commitment. Like I said, there's been a lot of twists and turns, and there may be another turn come Saturday. You know, I feel like LSU's not going to go down with the fight, especially if they're coming in so late into the game. There must be a little bit of negotiating going on back there. There's obviously NIL that's going to come into play. So I think that that's an interesting watch that Ole Miss Rebels will be. Will Clardy be a Rebel? Or is he going to flip to LSU? Or is he going to wait it out? Is he going to wait it closer to what we're seeing with a lot of these elite blue chip kids doing, you know, committed to one school, but they're still taking visits. They're still testing the water. So as far as recruiting this week, as far as Ole Miss is concerned, I think, of course, that's going to be the highlight. And I think now that we're seeing too, and I've been talking about it, you know, I spend a lot of time in Texas and Georgia watching our top recruits and, you know, scouting some new kids. And we've seen it a lot recently, that Texas pipeline is flowing for Ole Miss. We're getting a lot more Texas offers out there. So I think that's going to be an interesting element to see what new what new ways will Lane Kiffin and his recruiting staff uh, be utilizing as far as high school talent. The portal will be opening back up. It's just going to be interesting how the next week plays. And I believe as Ole Miss plays more, as we get into conference play, that's going to play also a major factor because, like I said, a lot of what's paused, a lot of these recruits, which would traditionally, be committed verbally or not, and of course, sign on December. I think what a lot of is playing in their mind is saying, is watching these teams in action. We can, as media, especially in the summer and the preseason, you can take all the visits in the world. You can hear all the preseason hype. You can look at all the polls, but at the end of the day, that's just paper. That's just a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I think until these recruits experience the atmosphere, till these families go in there, until they see if these teams are really as advertised, that they're better educated as far as what they're going to do, and when you're really down, I mean, for some of these recruits I've talked with personally, you wouldn't believe how close down to the wire. I mean, sometimes it is even hours before they're about to set their commitment because they're having second thoughts, or maybe they took a last minute play. There's just so many factors, Mark, that come into recruiting nowadays. But it's just really interesting. Lane mentioned it during SEC Media Days back in Dallas in July, how you have to treat recruiting different every year because every year you have to fill a different need. So it's interesting to see what, what I imagine Ole Miss will continue to go to heavy in the portal because we've seen what it's done for Lane and how he's navigated. But I do see Lane, touching more, and his staff going out to places like Texas, going out to places for more high school talent, because we've seen it here, the perfect mix, the perfect storm that he's created on defense and offense with young guys with transfer portal. And I expect more of that from Ole Miss on the recruiting trail.
Talking Ole Miss Rebels with all of you. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. The SEC had a nice weekend outside the conference. Of course, Ole Miss against Wake. Then you had Bama went to Wisconsin, took care of the Badgers pretty easily. One other non-conference game, Missouri, Boston College. In terms of the Power 5 conference matchups, the SEC comes out at 3-0 this past weekend. So, Leanne, as we look around the SEC, what catches your eye? We've got a big matchup with Tennessee going to Oklahoma. Any particular teams, storylines, games that catch your eye?
I think you brought that Tennessee-Oklahoma game. I think is going to be really interesting. I think what we've seen from Nico, at quarterback in Tennessee, he's another kid, that has translated really well, just been phenomenal on the offense. I saw, it's going to be interesting to see how Oklahoma takes this approach and how they're going. I mean, Tennessee has just been phenomenal on offense, and their defense has just been, like I said, exceptional. And I've seen Oklahoma a couple times. I saw, I looked at that game closely last week, when they played Houston. And that was a very interesting game to see because, Houston the week before, I saw them in person playing UNLV, and Houston just broke down. But then, man, when they came against Oklahoma, they had a lot of players that just adapted and readjusted. And it was a little bit scary to watch how Houston played against Oklahoma. So I'm really interested to see how Oklahoma is going to adjust to the fast-paced tempo that Josh Heupel and that Vols offense is going to put forward, because very much like Ole Miss, they're going to come out, guns a-blazing, and they're not going to let off the gate. And, they just have so many weapons. I don't know that, as far as Tennessee, I think they're another balanced team. Are they as balanced as the Rebels are? I don't quite see it yet, but I think that they have a lot of explosiveness, and I'm interested. I think that's the most interesting game for me outside from our game as far as a conference game, because how's Oklahoma going to adjust as a Big 12? Are they going to be able to handle Tennessee? I've just seen a lot of weak spots. Jackson Arnold, out of Denton Guyer here in Texas, was another highly touted recruit. I saw him against Houston. I saw him, playing. He was a very, very consistent quarterback in high school. But it's just another example of he just hasn't found his footing. And I believe that that's going to be that the Tennessee defense in their secondary is going to put tons of pressure coming out of Oklahoma. And I think that Arnold's going to have a very difficult time if his offensive line doesn't do what they need to do to be able to put points against that board. And I think it's going to come down to can Oklahoma get some kind of opening as far as being able to have a balanced game, to be able to pass and run and take control. And I mean, we know that all happens in the run game. And it's just going to be very interesting to see if Oklahoma can answer that call, because I just think it's very difficult against what Tennessee brings to the table offensively and defensively. They're just so explosive. and they know how to put pressure on a quarterback like Jackson Arnold. And I just said, but hey, welcome to the SEC. This is what you're going to play in and play out. So you got to get used to it. So no better time than Oklahoma right now than to adjust.
Absolutely. Getting into the SEC, of course, Kentucky gave Georgia a scare, so that proves that Georgia's human. And again, the SEC stepped out of conference. The most entertaining game of the week was that LSU South Carolina game. I caught that gun to gun.
Oh
And
yeah, it was.
South Carolina looked like the better team for most of the game, but LSU pulled it out. South Carolina had a couple pick sixes called back by penalty unfortunately, against the same guy, Kyle Kennard. I think South Carolina is a much improved football team, but couldn't find a way to win that one.
And again, I think that just goes back to when you start playing in conference play, when you start SEC play, it's in like we saw much like Ole Miss, as much as the margin was against Wake Forest, the little things that could hurt us down the road, much like what we saw LSU and is South Carolina, is those penalties, is those little details. Those are going to make the difference. I think that's like you said, they were neck and neck, and then here comes LSU slide by because there was little mistakes, and I think that's the same case that all these teams in the SEC trying to battle and better themselves. It's really going to come down to details. Your team can be playing strong, but if you make enough mistakes, it's anybody's game. And we saw it in LSU in South Carolina. And like you said, South Carolina came up there surprisingly. South Carolina is just one of those teams that just sometimes they find a way. And they don't have a lot of star players and star power like what we hear when you talk about other teams like Tennessee, when you talk about Ole Miss. There's not just this immense depth chart. But I will say what makes South Carolina scary and can be a spoiler is the talent they do have is just freakishly athletic on both sides of the ball. So it's almost like Iron Man ball. You can center your game around, some tough guys, and they play it out. And I think that's what makes South Carolina dangerous to a lot of these teams that are normal powerhouses, because you want to count them out. But like I said, we saw how it went down in Georgia and Kentucky. And I apologize to all my Wildcats out there because I thought that Georgia was just going to take them to the woodshed. But another perfect example, when you adapt and you adjust, same thing with South Carolina. They look like the better ball club than LSU. I would have thought that South Carolina would have slid by. But again, it's those little things, it's those details. And, it's now that we're heading into conference play, I think we're going to have to see a lot of the teams, especially Ole Miss, run a tighter ship as far as penalties and don't let little things get away from them, like those bad snaps, those things that could change the game, cause a turnover.
All right. In the SEC, basically, we've got this is going to be the last weekend where we've got a lot of teams running around taking on some inferior competition like the Kentucky-Ohio University game, although OU is a decent team. Bowling Green going to Texas A&M, the Akron game against South Carolina, some of those games, and obviously the Ole Miss game is a 35-point favorite against Georgia Southern. Leanne hit on Tennessee, Oklahoma. Tennessee's a full touchdown favorite on the road. Arkansas, Auburn, the odds makers have that as a 3-point spread in Auburn's favor, which basically means it's a pick'em game in terms of the talent. And then we touched on Florida and Mississippi State, kind of the dead man walking sort of game for Billy Napier. That Florida team's probably happy to be out of town and out of that stadium and away from the Boo Birds to take on Mississippi State that lost to Toledo by 24 points. Ole Miss fans not necessarily crying about that.
No, they're not.
All right. Anything else we wanted to hit on today? I don't think so. I think we've run the gamut.
No, I think just one more thing. I mean, we were talking about Tennessee and we're talking about NIL and recruiting. I thought an interesting tidbit was, now that Tennessee starting next season is going to add a talent tax. I'm not sure if it's like 10% or 12% now to ticket sales. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, attesting to another element of trying to raise those NIL collectives and pay players. Never did we think I think looking back, even 5-10 years ago that, we're going to have talent tax added to, but Tennessee, I mean, that's an innovative thing. As much as I don't like to give accolades to Tennessee and the Bulls, I mean, that's a pretty creative way, to start incurring extra funds to pay your players in an upfront way. And I feel like when it comes to ticket sales and all that, fans already want the experience, especially in the SEC. So paying that extra 10 to 12% added to the ticket fees next season to go to their talent, to their players, 10%. There you go. You pulled it up. I mean, that's a pretty interesting take, and I think that that's another creative. And I'm interested to see who's going to follow suit. I think now that battle for NIL, as we're figuring it out, as that dark cloud that's kind of lingered over in the first couple of years of NIL, is it a bad thing? I mean, it's going to have its mistakes, but I think now, similar to what the Grove Collective has done, and Walker Jones over here at Ole Miss, it's just having to navigate through uncharted territory. So I think now that we're getting more comfortable with NIL, schools are finding new ways, to walk within the lines. And I think this is just another perfect example that makes sense. And that's just an interesting to see is, now are we going to add a tax, are we going to start selling Jackson Dart merchandise, during games? Is he going to get taxed? Similar to what you do in NIL, but are we going to see it now more open out there? Is our pro shop at the stadium going to, have a player tax if you have merchandise? That's just really interesting. But I mean, I got it. Hats off to Kentucky. I mean, hats off to Tennessee right there for coming in with that, because I think that's just another creative way, staying within the box, but also thinking outside the box.
All right, I'm going to do some quick math here. 10% per ticket. So you got 100,000 people in that stadium at Tennessee, and I'm going to throw out $100 per ticket. Just very rough number. So we're talking $10 per player or per ticket at 100,000. That's $1 million. That's $1 million more per home game. So they play 7 or 8 home games. They should be able to rake in 7 or 8 million more at least. Huh.
Exactly. And you said, and some of those people that play, and you're talking just base $100. Now you're talking about, okay, we got suites, we got, all those upper tier tickets. And like I said, are we going to start taxing like name, images, likeness merchandise? Are we going to see more pro shops? I mean, we already see a lot of the players have their own merchandise, through their own website. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But again, hats off to Tennessee for taking, that extra step and finding a logistic way to play, pay their players, because they're being transparent about it. And I think that's the biggest thing. At the end of the day, it's about being transparent, and I think it's always going to be a race. Now with this NIL, it's just like I said, it's finding a creative way to navigate what was been uncharted waters. But I think as we get more comfortable, we're going to see more things like this. And it's not going to seem something out of the ordinary when we have a talent tax, or, we have this, because, I think that the fans, and especially the players, are being transparent about it. And I think that at the end of the day, we want to, the players deserve to get some kind of compensation outside their scholarships and their thing. If you think about it day in and day out, I mean, we get compensation when you go into work, you get healthcare, you get all these different things, and it's the same thing. These guys put their bodies on the line, every week in and week out, and we get to watch it. And all these different things. So like I said, that's another interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see who follows suit and what other creative things we're going to see down the road to be able to build collectives. Because now I said this partnership, with these added funds to be able to hire extra analysts. I mean, that extra $1 million a game can go a long way, to hire and to bring players in, and, without over asking boosters and overstepping in other grounds,
I'm curious to know whether they will just divide that evenly among the players, or that they will make evaluations on the value of the players. Nico gets this, Dylan Sampson, their best running back, gets that, et cetera, down the line, or they're just going to split it and that's what it is.
See, that's a great question, because then that brings up a whole nother debate. How do you like you said, are we going to do it across the board, or do we evaluate player talent just like you would in the NFL? Another example of like I said, this NFL model that I think a lot of people are going to follow suit of what Lane's been doing, with his players, with his program. That's just another example. How do you justify it? And again, it's another new thing that we're going to have to navigate the waters through. But it's really, like I said, it's really interesting to see what this year is going to bring from NIL to the playoffs. It's just an exciting time in college football, because I think just all these new transitions and everything just make the game so different. And I really think that people want to see this transition and this, this thing. But like I said, big week ahead for the Ole Miss Rebels, Georgia Southern. Just a quick take on that. I think the biggest things, we really keep playing how we're playing. We're translating really well on paper, especially in the offense. like I said. But some of the biggest things that I think the biggest things we're going to have to do, especially like a team like Georgia Southern, that brings the air raid, make air raid great again. Mike Leach is smiling down from heaven, seeing that there's still teams doing the air raid, and of course Hal Mummy, looking on, the originator of that. And it's going to be really interesting to see another team like Ole Miss, you know, survive and to be another day, because every game you never know what could happen. We see it week in and week out. Ole Miss definitely has the capabilities, and they're going to keep it close. But I think that this is good. Out of all the games, the non-conference games that we played, I do believe that Georgia Southern is going to bring a lot more to the table than what we've seen in week 1, week 2, and week 3. And this is not a bad thing for Ole Miss. We want to play teams that bring it to the table and that are going to play as hard, because that's only makes us better. But I think the key things this week is to continue to for the secondary to find its footing. A player like Isaiah Hamilton, he was a transfer, from Houston, was a highly talented recruit, really phenomenal when he played at Houston. I expect him to have a lot stronger game, especially with him being more familiar going against an offense like an air raid, like what we're going to see Georgia Southern. So I expect him to be another player that we don't hear a lot about, but he's also, I think, he's been playing a lot of man to man, but he's used to playing a little mid zone like when he was at Houston. I think he's going to have a great game. And I think that when we get Key Lawrence back in full force, I think that the secondary and the safeties are going to also be more in tune. So I expect a lot of this game to be adapt and adjust and a lot of cleanup. Like I said, win those turnover battles. And for Ole Miss to keep coming out with that speed that it's coming out, I think whoever controls the game and whoever sets the tempo is going to have a strong footing. And I do believe it'll be the Ole Miss Rebels, but let's not count Georgia Southern out. I don't think that it's going to be this blowout. I do believe that Georgia Southern offensively can bring a lot to the table, and they do have some good defensive players. But the question is, do they have the answer to go against those defensive and offensive fronts? And I say defense because, we're the highest grade defense going in right now, and they've been doing their job. The secondary, trying to find their footing, but still been an excellent job, has a lot of playmakers. Again, Centurion Perkins is going to have a big game, another young kid that's going to be phenomenal this week, and he's going to be a lot of playmakers. It's going to be tough for that Georgia Southern air raid offense to go against. And then, of course, like I said, our offensive line doing what it did. Yes, it had some mix-ups, bad snaps, but that happens. But all in all, we've come a long way on the line of scrimmage and in the trenches. And I think having those big bodies up front do what they've been doing in week 1, week 2, and week 3, allow Jackson Dart, and our wide receivers and our running backs to put those points on the board. And let's not forget the 2 tight ends we have, man. They've just had a phenomenal role in all this. We talk about the deep wide receiver core that we have and running backs, but the tight ends that we have make it very difficult when you put them in to prepare for them. And Georgia Southern defense is going to have a tough time when our tight ends come in. Like I said, they already have a tough time when our wide receivers and our running core and Jackson Dart gets connection with them. But let's talk about the tight ends. They've created a little bit of chaos on the offensive side of the ball. So like I said, it's going to be a lot. It's pretty cut and dry, cleaning up the mistakes, not having those penalties, because those penalties, like you said, perfect example, South Carolina, LSU, neck and neck game. But those little mistakes can make the difference. So expect this to be a cleanup game, secondary to find their footing, a lot of young guys to step up. We can go into stats all day, but new week, new game. What happened last week at Wake Forest isn't going to be the same storyline this week.
It's also the USC Coaching Bowl with Clay Helton and Lane Kiffin, 2 former USC head coaches. Leanne, you don't know about this, but we are announcing today that so this will be released on October 29th. October 29th is the date, everyone, that we are releasing our new book here, Disputed National Champions. So there we go.
I'm going to definitely have to pick up a couple. I'm going to have to pick up a couple copies of that. One of my favorite football books, I'm always good about football books, is The Junction Boys. I think I've read that from cover to cover. And as much as I'm not an A&M fan, I always like to read. I mean, because like you said, you can bring so much insight. A lot of people with, what we get to see in media and your experience and all that kind of stuff. So can't wait to get that read for sure.
I appreciate it. Well, Leanne, good to see you as always. I'm glad that we started this venture covering Ole Miss football every week. So we will continue next week.
Okay, see you next week.
This weekend, of course. And the Ole Miss games
I will be on
5 Eastern on the SEC network.
Yes, we will. And hotty toddy and beat Southern.